Is Meghan facing a ticking time bomb? Is Catherine about to challenge her with a jam of her own? What was up with Camilla's encounter with a half-naked man? And what has an ex-lover of Princess Diana been saying about William and Harry making up? Buckle up, it's a brilliant show we've got for you. Welcome to Palace Confidential. I'm Jo Elvin, and back this week is the Daily Mail's royal editor, Rebecca English. And it says here your old sparring partner, but you two get on, right?
So we get on well.
You get on. The Daily Mail's fellow star, Richard Eden. Welcome to you both. Now, a reminder to subscribe to this YouTube channel, and please do help us get over that 400,000 mark. We're getting closer every week, and if we get there, I get a brownie. So I'm invested. That's my incentive. Playing straight after this show is a marathon episode of Reading the Royals. It's great for those who haven't caught up on the series yet, or for those of you who've told us that you use the show to get to sleep. Conscious or unconscious, we'll have the views. Thank you very much, and we hope you enjoy that. Now, I hope you're awake, my panel.
Raring to go.
Do you need a slap around the chops, or can I continue?
We're good.
Because we've got a lot to get through today. But before we get to Richard and Rebecca, here are the Prince and Princess of Wales getting down to it in the kitchen. Rebecca, tell us, what were they up to?
Great engagement in Wales yesterday for the Prince and Princess of Wales, who actually haven't been on a joint engagement in the nation for over a year now. October
Understandably.
2023, exactly. And they had to cancel a lot of their plans to go there because of Catherine's cancer treatment. But they were there ahead of St David's Day, which is the national celebration of the country's patron saint. And they were in a place called Pontypridd, which actually is where my mother's family comes from.
Aww.
And Tom Jones.
Oh.
Is their most famous export. So they were there at the local market, and they got really stuck in making Welsh cakes, which is, I promise you, a delicious speciality.
Love Welsh cakes.
Straight off the griddle, bit of sugar, nothing better.
M&S do a good one if you can't make them yourself.
I've had those.
Yes.
Still not as good as my mum's.
No,
though.
I'm sure.
And there's quite a nice piece of banter between them. And then they also went to a local community woodland and garden area where I wrote it quite with a kind of smile on my face that Catherine was chatting to some of these local young people who help out at this community garden, and they were growing plums, and she made a point of saying, "Oh, we grow plums, and I like to make my own plum jam. I'll send you the recipe." William described, I think he said it was amazing, her jam. But I had
that's a bit of a cheeky ref, isn't it?
Wry smile on my face. I don't think she meant it like that, but clearly jam is not only Meghan's jam.
What? I've been led to believe that she's the queen of jam.
Jams, well, exactly.
If it was Meghan, she would have said, I'll sell you a jar. Here's the recipe. Yeah, jam wars.
Kate selling the recipe for free.
There's your headline. Now, Richard, obviously big crowds out for them. It does show the power of them as a couple, doesn't it? Their popularity.
Definitely. I mean, the fact that they haven't been to Wales together for more than a year, it is significant. But no, they do a lot of engagement separately, and it's relatively rare, for them to be together. This is a big statement. We know they love Wales. Some of the happiest times they've had together was when William was stationed in Anglesey in North Wales. And I think so they were clearly very pleased to be there, and everyone locally was delighted to see them back.
Huge crowds yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, huge crowds, especially for a cold, wet and windy midweek day. The crowds were huge.
Very on brand for Britain. I'm sick of the rain. Anyway, well, there was a fascinating interview with one Jason Knauf, a former royal staffer who's known as the whistleblower on allegations that Meghan Markle bullied staff, claims she denies. We'll get into the Meghan and Harry stuff later, but he did have some moving words about William and Catherine. In particular, that William was the lowest he'd ever seen him after the cancer diagnoses of both his wife and his father. Rebecca, what did you make of that bit? You've been with William a lot recently. Do you think he looks like a man for whom a weight has been lifted?
100%. I've written it for the Daily Mail as well, that I've really seen that spring back in his step of late. But I think it's really fascinating that someone as close to him as Jason, who I knew well, because obviously he was the communications secretary for a number of years, and when he left that job, he became the head of William and Catherine's Royal Foundation, and then it still remains with the Prince working on his Earthshot Awards. And so you know, he would speak to Jason honestly, and for Jason to be able to say, you know, it was the lowest he'd ever seen him, I would take that as gospel. So I think it's very interesting he wanted to make the point, and from what I understand, that although the interview ended up focusing on other things, actually that was the impetus of Jason doing this very rare interview, because he just wanted to show what a really tough year it had been for William, because of course the programme was about, you know, the Prince of Wales he is and the king he will one day become, and Jason was making the point what strength of character he'd seen of him, you know, in the face of really difficult odds in the past year, and how they were coming through the other side.
So in this interview, which was with 60 Minutes, the television programme in Australia, inevitably they asked him about the rift between William and Harry. What did he say?
I thought for me this was one of the most interesting parts of the interview, because, you know, Jason is a consummate professional and actually a thoroughly nice guy. And I think sometimes what he says is as interesting as what he doesn't say. So he basically said, look, it's, you know, for those that know the two brothers, it's sad because they actually achieved a lot together. But he went on to make the point that families are families, and sometimes these things happen. And I think the sense was that he couldn't see that rift being repaired anytime soon, if possibly ever. Wow. Well, Richard, I want to ask you what you make of another interesting interview this week. I want to read you a quote from James Hewitt, who, as we know, is a former boyfriend of the late Princess Diana. And he was interviewed and said that the princess would be trying to heal the rift between the boys if she were alive today. He said, I think any mother would be worried and concerned about such a rift, as you put it, and she'd do her best to try and get them together. Does anyone want James Hewitt's opinion?
Well, it's interesting to hear, but I have to say, I always find it so tasteless when we speculate about what dead people would think. I mean, you know, you can say anything. I mean, personally, I think, like, obviously she would be horrified if her sons have fallen out, just as I'm sure King Charles is. But would we be in this position anyway if she was still alive? I mean, would Harry really have gone, you know, written his book and made all these claims against his family if his mother was there? I suspect she may have been a calming influence, but, you know, it's one of these things we'll never know.
Well, to another very important royal topic now. I'm talking, of course, about royal dogs. Vital. Camilla has a new one. What's going on, and why haven't I been informed? Because I love dogs.
Well, I think I remember talking about this with you last year when I had a story, and I revealed that they were actively looking for a dog when the time was right, after she very sadly lost Beth, her beloved Jack Russell. And Queen Camilla was on engagement in Canterbury in Kent this week and was stroking a guide dog, and she said, oh, he's probably really interested because he can smell my dogs.
Dogs?
Yeah, exactly. And so she said, I've just got a new puppy, an 8-week-old, what we call a Heinz here, bit of everything.
Lovely. A Bitzer in Australia.
Exactly,
a Bitzer.
An 8-week-old puppy called Molly, because she looks like a mole. The mother, there's definitely got some Jack Russell in her. Father unknown. And she's come from Battersea Dogs Home in London, just like Beth did, and her current dog Bluebell is so. And I haven't had a chance to talk to her about it, but I have spoken to some of her staff, and I said, well, have you had a cuddle yet? And they went, oh my God, she's so cute. All pink belly and little pink nose. And I think they're pretty hopeful we might see some pictures of her next week.
Well, I hope so. I love a pooch.
I also asked them if she'd peed on the carpet at the palace yet, and they said actually she didn't disgrace herself at all. So
I should say, I have heard that Queen Camilla's much keener on dogs than the King, actually.
Really?
And that the dogs largely stay at her house in Wiltshire.
They do, yeah.
Braymil
The King
House.
doesn't like dogs.
No,
he loves dogs.
I'm not sure he doesn't like them. I think that's pushing it. But you know what dogs are like. They're very messy, and it's quite stressful, particularly with a new one. But they stay at Camilla's house, yeah.
Yeah, they do. They do. They're well travelled, though, because when she's old enough, Molly will join Bluebell in going to Balmoral for the summer. I mean, that rescue dog has really fallen on her paws, I have to say.
Well, speaking of the King, last week we had Camilla winking at our Rebecca, and here is the King now, not to be outdone, speaking to her.
Because the dates are mentioned in the Quran many times. Okay, thank you.
Production
I
am slightly intimidated by his speed and her speed.
What was going on there, Rebecca?
Yeah, yesterday was such a random day. So I started off the morning covering one of their engagements in London's Carnaby Street, where they were, it's ahead of the start of Ramadan, the Muslim holy month, and they were there at this amazing female-run restaurant, Darjeeling Express, and by the smells coming out the kitchen.
It is one of the best restaurants
in
London.
I'm definitely going back there to try it, I have to say. I had to run on to Buckingham Palace to do another job afterwards, so I couldn't actually get to taste anything, but they were making up food parcels that will be sent to hospitals for people when they're breaking their fast, iftar I think it's called, and also packing dates, which is the traditional fruit used to break your fast. But there was a funny moment as well when Camilla was meant to be doing the curry, and she just suddenly thought, I'm going to get my husband to help me. And she'd wander around there going, darling, you come here. And he eventually came and gave her a hand. And then she joined him on this kind of packing line of the dates. And he was so quick, the poor lady was trying to put them in the, put the stickers on the packet, couldn't keep up. And I looked at him, he looked at me and got the giggles, and I was like, it's a bit like a production line. He was like, well, we don't hang around here, we're paid on results. So, do you know what?
Paid on results, is that the new motto?
Yeah, he was in such a good mood yesterday, he really was.
Maybe he's missed his calling.
I genuinely felt like he was back to his old self again.
Maybe it's the new dog.
Maybe it is, put a pep in his step.
Yeah.
And we were talking about William earlier on and just how much things feel in a better place. And I really do think it's the same for him. He had a real spring in his step yesterday.
Well, speaking of that, you were also with the Queen at Buckingham Palace yesterday, and I believe there was a bit of an eye-opening moment when she met a man with quite a few muscles and also not many clothes.
No,
Is there some scandal you've uncovered?
I said to one of the authors there, I said, I don't think Buckingham Palace has seen, such spangly pants ever anywhere. Well, not since the Stuarts, they haven't. Which passes a very good joke in palace circles. So there was a big event yesterday. She was hosting the finals of BBC's 500 Words competition, which is an amazing writing competition for young people between 5 and 11. And yet
there was nudity.
And there was nudity.
Yeah.
I've got to tell you, I kind of go through what they call the side entrance at the palace, which is kind of the back entrance where staff
we can't have you going in
non-important guests come through. And you kind of go up, the palace is like a rabbit warren, you kind of go up these steps at the back, and the door opened, and it's normally one of the footmen opening the doors for you. And it opened, and there was said man wearing nothing but pants and this tiny singlet.
Did he have to go in the side entrance?
And I just kind of automatically blurted out and went, oh my God, the footmen have let themselves go a bit recently.
Why was he not wearing many clothes?
So he's a gladiator. This is what Richard wants to get down to the nub of it,
It's a fair question.
He's a gladiator, which I don't know if they have in other parts of the world, but it's kind of a popular programme.
I think they do have a franchise of that in America.
I think maybe Australia as well.
I don't know.
What, so he just dresses like that all the time?
So they're kind of often former professional athletes, and they compete against members of the public in this show. I've not really watched it. I've not watched it for years.
I don't believe you.
To be fair, if I had muscles like him, I'd want to show them off too.
Don't talk yourself down, Richard. We know it's all bulging under that suit jacket.
This show's going off on a tangent I really didn't expect now. So anyway, he was there, and he told me he because they're very popular characters with the children, that they were him and his female counterpart, Fire. He was called Nitro, real name Harry, and Fire. We're going to escort the children back.
It's Nitro.
Escort the children back to their seats. And he told me afterwards that he'd actually turned up in a suit, thinking he should be suited and booted. And they were like, "No, get your kit off, mate. We want you in your full outfit."
Special request by the Queen.
Poor objectified Nitro.
And he told me, he was such a lovely guy. He told me that it was the second time he'd been to Buckingham Palace. But he'd been before to meet Queen Elizabeth, because he's actually an Olympian, a former Olympian sprinter, and he'd been invited to, because of his achievements, to meet the Queen. But he said to me, I never thought I'd come back wearing less clothes than I did before. But what was so great about Camilla is she didn't skip a beat. He was in a lineup, and she had to meet him in the Celebrity lineup, and she'd just shaken hands with Olivia Colman, who of course famously played Queen Elizabeth in The Crown. And then turned to this guy and they said, well, this is Harry, but you might know him better as Nitro. And she was like, hello, lovely to meet you. She didn't give an indication for a second that he actually really wasn't wearing much in the way of clothes.
She kept her eyes on his face.
She totally kept her eyes on his face. And, he gave this kind of really sweet little bow in his kind of spangly pants, and they just had a perfectly normal conversation. Then she moved on to the next person, and that's what I love about this job and palace function, is that you just never know what's going to happen.
It was all normal, nothing to see there. I can't wait for the comments section on that this week, but for now, there's lots of comments on last week's show with just our Rebecca, and if you missed it, you make sure you do check back for that one. Lauren Smith had this to say: if Harry and Meghan had come to America, ditched the titles, rolled up their sleeves and done really meaningful work, charity, etc., they might still be popular. Many Americans love and are fascinated by the British royal family, but we have no desire to have an American royal family. The insistence on using the Duchess of Sussex title is so insufferable. They are not relatable at all, and so tone deaf. Well, she hasn't minced words there, has she? Wendy Evans defended William and Catherine's decision to skip the BAFTA Film Awards to go on holiday to Mystique. She says, if I had a choice between the BAFTAs or Mystique, I know where I would go. A room of overprivileged, egotistic actors or family in the sun in a really rich resort. But yes, okay. We had lots of discussion about King Charles personally presenting a 100th birthday card to a very lucky lady last week. Bonnie B says, the palace actually keeps records of these cards sent on behalf of the monarch. I misplaced one and wrote to them, and they sent a confirmation letter of the occasion. That's quite admin-y, isn't it?
That's lovely, actually.
Yeah. And Betsy Pavitt says, don't forget to have that you have to write into the palace to receive a birthday card from King Charles. So I think we've done some checking, and I think you do automatically get it in the UK if you have a state pension.
Yeah.
But if you're in the Commonwealth, you do have to apply. Is that right?
Yes, and you can also get a special telegram, that's what they called it in the old days, but a card now, for if you're celebrating your 60th, 65th and 70th wedding anniversaries, but you do have to apply for those 5 weeks in advance.
So many facts, Rebecca.
I know.
I'm very impressed. Now, Patriot Mama enjoyed last week's show, and in particular the montage of royal portraits at the end. And she writes, welcome back, Rebecca. You are looking fabulous. Glad to have you back with your such personal take on things. Looking at these royal portraits, Prince William looks an awful lot like a cross between his great paternal grandfather and Prince Philip when they were young. Amazing. Wow, that's a detailed eye, isn't it? I have to go back and study that. We think she means George VI, so here they are on screen, and let us know what you think in the comments below. And as always, do keep the comments coming. We love hearing from you. Well, let's return to that interview with Jason Knauf now, and he was asked about being thrust into the spotlight after an email emerged where he had claimed that Meghan had bullied 2 staff members from their jobs at the palace, claims that she denies, of course. Now, Rebecca, while he said he wished them the best, he also said he had no regrets and wouldn't change anything. Now, that won't be what Harry and Meghan will want to hear, is it?
I mean, to be fair to Jason, I think he was slightly put on the spot with this, and actually he chose.
He must have expected it, though.
Yeah, I think he probably did to a certain extent, but the programme seemed to focus more on that, I think, than actually kind of his insight into what William was going to be like as king. And I think he chose his words very, very carefully, and he made clear, he said, as a PR professional, when you're defending people's actions and protecting public figures from the media, sometimes probably you do have to get a taste of your own medicine and be on the receiving end of it. And unfortunately for Jason, when he made, those allegations and they were then made public, and then he subsequently appeared as a witness in a case between Harry and the Mail on Sunday, the vitriol thrown in his direction was awful, and I would argue wholly disproportionate for someone who was just trying to do the right thing by the people he worked for. So he was very diplomatic and said, look, I think you have to take the rough with the smooth with this job, and I certainly did in bucket loads.
I thought he came across really well, actually.
Yeah, so did I. I mean, I know him. As I say, he was a very decent guy, and was a very good PR professional, but just ended up, like a lot of people who work there, in a very difficult situation.
What do you think, Richard? Obviously, we know that Meghan's new Netflix show premieres next week. Can we read anything into the timing of this interview in that context?
I mean, certainly the timing is very interesting, because you might remember that the emails, the claims about Meghan's bullying came out just days, and it was literally the day before the big sit-down interview with Oprah Winfrey that caused so much trouble. So there was a sense that that had been leaked to try to I would say to put some balance out there before they started attacking the royal family. And then we have this interview now being broadcast just before her much hyped new series. So yes, the timing is interesting. I mean, realistically, it's probably a coincidence, but I mean, there's no doubt that this interview will be painful and worrying for Harry and Meghan.
And do you think it will have a detrimental effect on any PR and buzz around the show?
I'm not sure about that, but it certainly just will worry Meghan in the sense of what's next.
Right.
Is this going to open the floodgates? Will he be saying more? And will others speak out? Because remember, there's so much still to come out.
Now, what was interesting to me, I thought, Rebecca, is like even people who haven't worked at the palace for years are normally very, very reluctant to go on the public record. So he must have had some sort of tacit approval from William to do this interview.
I think people have assumed that. I'm not so entirely sure that's the case, because I think a good PR professional instinctively knows what is the right thing to do and what their bosses, or former bosses in this case, would approve of and what they wouldn't approve of. And I've seen that time and time again with people certainly speaking for the royal family.
But he wouldn't have blindsided William with this interview.
No, I'm sure he would have told him that he'd planned to do it. As I said, I know from his point of view, the reason why he did the interview was actually not to kind of raise the whole Harry and Meghan issue again. Actually, it was just to pay tribute to the man that he worked for. And as he said with William and Catherine, what you see is what you get. And, he thinks, he will make a very good Prince of Wales and eventually a very good king. That was actually the point of him doing the interview.
Now, it's something that we've talked about before, Richard, but it feels like this so-called, dossier of alleged bullying, it feels like we still don't know any detail, and we probably never will.
No, the problem we've got is that Buckingham Palace said that it would remain private and confidential. They said that they carried out this investigation, they spoke to people, and they will kind of use it in the future when they're formulating a policy of how things work in the palace. So
right.
they sort of said it would be useful in that way, but not publishing it. And that's very unsatisfactory because, for Harry and Meghan, perhaps they want it to be published because there's these claims being made, but they can't really address them. It's just lingering until they're actually in the public. So it's unsatisfactory for Meghan's, from her perspective, but also, for the public and everyone else. Like, what's the truth? If this bullying's going on, shouldn't, we be allowed to know about it?
Well, the other point I think it raises is, Rebecca, Harry, we know, is not shy about launching legal claims, and there's never been any whiff of that about these allegations, has there?
No, and don't forget at the time they did issue some strongly worded legal rebuttal to the claims which were first aired in the Times newspaper. In fact, they described it as part of an ongoing smear campaign against the couple, but her in particular, which were very strong words, and yet they've never followed up on that. And I think a lot of people have been led to the conclusion that that's because there is a certain amount of truth in them. Because if not, why not sue? They've sued over pretty much everything else.
Well, and it was interesting, wasn't it, Richard? One of your colleagues called it a ticking time bomb for Meghan. Yes,
well, this was a column by Amanda Patel that people can read on Mail Plus, and she was just making a similar point to the one I've just made, which is that the fact that Jason has spoken out might encourage others, and the time bomb is the sense that there's a lot which hasn't been said in public, which may be said.
Do you think that's fair?
Certainly, I think Jason feels very strongly about it,
yeah.
and others do, because they feel that, it wasn't right that it was kept quiet. I mean, we saw that in the emails that were published at the time, that he was very disappointed that at Meghan's treatment of some staff and the way that was handled. So, I think the best thing would be if the palace does publish it and, let us see. That really would be good for everyone.
But as I say, that's not looking likely, is it, at the moment?
No, to be fair to the palace, one of their arguments was that it involves, obviously, private interactions, and some of these people actually don't want their identities made public because they're professionals who are trying to move ahead in the fields that they're working in, and some actually were genuinely traumatised by their experience. I think where that argument falls down is the fact the palace made a point of saying, we are investigating this, ... and everyone expected that the results of that investigation would be made public. So,
well, just sticking with Meghan quickly, Richard, there'd been reports in America that she'd been dropped, not working with her agents anymore, William Morris Endeavour, but then they've denied that. What's the story?
Yeah, this was basically an intriguing bit of gossip that's coming from America, and it was announced with great fanfare that she was being represented by Harry and Meghan, very big figure in Hollywood, but that does seem to have all gone very quiet. And the gossip at the agency was that she'd been dropped. Well, that's been denied, we should say, on the record by the agency, that say they will still represent Archwell and do other things. But it's hard not to conclude that there is some cooling there in the relationship. But obviously, because of the high staff turnover that they've had and the way other people that have worked with Harry and Meghan have spoken out, does always, you kind of think, there's more to it than,
that might
we're
be
hearing.
Watch this space moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Hear that. It is time, of course, for our Unsung Royal Hero of the Week. Now, usually I let one of the panel nominate, but today I thought I would do the honours. And I am nominating Princess Anne for a stylish yet environmentally friendly revival of an old coat. Here she is this week meeting victims of a recent storm wearing a rather elegant green coat. And here she is wearing the same one 22 whole years ago, green in every sense. We love that. Rebecca, there are few better at recycling their, as we call it, their clothing than Princess Anne, isn't there?
I think that's very fair. I mean, 22 years is not a great time for her to be re-wearing these outfits. We've seen her wearing things, from 30 or 40 years ago. I'm very jealous she can still fit into the things she wore.
Well, because she never sits still.
40
she never
years ago.
puts on an ounce of weight. Yeah.
And
well, also she's lucky she's got lots of storage as well, no, for keeping all these things.
That is true. But I think also there's a functionality about it for her. You can almost say, well, this looks still fine. This does the job. So why not wear it? And she obviously learnt that from Queen Elizabeth, who would re-wear the same outfits, use the same handbags, for 30, 40, 50 years. And I remember being at Buckingham Palace once, and there was an exhibition of some of her dresses, and one of the dresses was made from a bolt of fabric she'd been given on a state visit somewhere, 40 years before, and they'd obviously sat there in the royal vaults and they'd waited the opportunity to use it, which I think is a brilliant example of upcycling to us all.
But also, don't forget, they really were the waste not, want not generation, weren't they? Sort of like living through the war days and all of those things. It's such. I think a lot of young people now they only know fast fashion, and that's just not the way the world used to behave.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why. Do you remember when there was that kind of story several years ago when one of the newspapers got a reporter to infiltrate Buckingham Palace as a footman and took pictures of the Queen's breakfast table, which the palace found very invasive, but was fascinating to people because she was there with the little Tupperware pots, and that's not what they expected of the head of state. But she went, if I don't use my cornflakes today, we'll put them back in the Tupperware box for tomorrow. And I think you're right, that is a wonderful generational thing.
Well, there was a lot of love for our section on last week's Unsung Hero, the Duke of Kent, particularly how he is still working at 89 years of age. And indeed, he represented the King in Germany just this month. So that got us looking into some pictures of the royals in Germany over the years. And here are some of our very favourite presented to you in montage form. Wunderschön, as I believe they say over there. How's my accent? It was all
Very
right,
good,
wasn't it?
Jo.
A reminder that the Reading the Royals Marathon is up next. Click here for that one. My thanks to Rebecca, Richard, and to you for watching, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.